Hello again, folks. Welcome back to another edition of Ville on the Ville, where we will talk about quite a bit on the slate this week as the Cardinals have two pretty big games on the hardwood and on the football field as well. And the first thing I want to do though, this week is to congratulate Jeff Brom and the Purdue Boilermakers. Obviously, this is a Louisville-based show, and Jeff Brom, being a Louisville alum, really did far more than I think anybody would have expected him to do in his first year in West Lafayette. I think everybody knew that Purdue would be better, without question. He would make them a better, more competitive team, but I don't know if anybody expected that, A, they would go bowling and get a bowl win in their first year. So just an outstanding job. Just want to start off by saying congratulations to Jeff and the Purdue Boilermakers with that win. Looked like they were going to dominate, big lead at the half. Things got kind of sketchy, actually lost the lead in the second half, but then a great drive at the end to get the win. There in the Foster Farms Bowl. So tip of the cap to Jeff Brom and the Boilermakers as they get the win in a bowl game. But now, on to the more important things for at least the Louisville fans hopefully tuning in this week. And that's two big games, the first of which will happen Friday afternoon in Rupp Arena as the Cards and Cats showdown for this annual Battle of the Bluegrass. And, you know, right out of the gate, you want to talk about questions for both teams. I'm not sure if I can recall in recent history that there have been as many questions around both teams entering this game. Louisville and Kentucky, neither have defeated a ranked opponent as of yet. And really, both of the teams haven't really been able to give themselves a marked identity up until this point. Louisville has shown flashes of really good basketball, but they've been fleeting. What they've shown more is an inconsistency, an inability to start games. That has probably been their biggest problem up until this point, is getting out of the gate, establishing themselves, especially against inferior competition. Ironically, I think two of their better starts on the season have been against the better teams they've played, Purdue and Seton Hall. In particular, Purdue, probably the most hostile environment, easily the most hostile environment they've seen to this point, the only true road game they've played up until what will be the game against Kentucky. So I guess that's a little bit of an encouraging thing for Louisville fans to look at and say, hey, you know, they were very young back then. That was very early in the season. And they started off pretty well. Now, they didn't finish well. And that has also been a problem in many games. It's just they've been fortunate that most of their opponents have just been outmatched, so they've been able to win those games despite not probably playing their best. But what I have been encouraged by in the last game against Grand Canyon, they won easily, but that game was still a one-possession game about 7 or 8 minutes into the second half. But then they did establish a double-digit lead. They pushed out, and they pretty much stayed there. And that is, you know, and Grand Canyon is probably one of the top 5 teams that Louisville has played up until this point. I mean, they probably, you might even say they're every bit as good as Indiana, Memphis. And so to push out, get that lead and maintain it was at least a good sign leading into the Kentucky game. Now, again, it's a totally different competition level going up against the Wildcats. And, of course, you're going to be playing in Rupp Arena. But the biggest question mark for Louisville, I think, early on was Quentin Snyder not really being consistent. He has become that. You've seen that from him for several games now, and that's a fantastic sign, especially the way you saw him play against Kentucky last year. And that could be kind of a component of this game that a lot of times in the past you saw when Kentucky had not the one-and-done talent, but the local talent. You know, is Louisville going to have that advantage now with guys like Ray Spalding, Quentin Snyder, Dwayne Sutton even? Dwayne Sutton has never played in this game, but he grew up here. He understands the rivalry, and he might be able to provide them, you know, that factor of I'm the local guy. This game means so much to me, and the effort might just be different. Because that's another thing with Louisville. Up until this point, you've seen it if you've watched them. From time to time, you don't quite see the urgency that you'd like to see, that frankly we're used to seeing when Pitino was the coach. Regardless of opponent, the effort really never waned. It was always almost at 100% full throttle. At times you do see a little bit of, I don't want to say lackadaisical, that's not really fair, but the urgency just isn't there. Loose balls, going for the balls, diving on the floor. Even against Grand Canyon, there was a case where the ball was on the floor, and I think it was Dengadell could have just dove for it and gotten the ball and didn't do that. Kind of tried to stay up and grab it by bending over. And those are the things you don't want to see as the season goes on. So those lapses in urgency, hopefully we'll see less of that. And against the forced Kentucky, I don't think that's going to be an issue. I don't think it ever is. In terms of questions for the Wildcats, full disclosure, I haven't watched a lot of them this year. I saw a little bit of them against Kansas. I saw a little bit of them against Virginia Tech, probably their best performance of the year so far, where they shot the ball for them unusually well. They just haven't been a significant perimeter-oriented team. But they, I think the knock on them, especially when they lost to UCLA, was they're having trouble keeping guys in front of them, and that's really an issue for Louisville as well. Defensively, Louisville doesn't seem to show a lot of that lateral quickness, the ability to keep the ball in front of them. I mean, when you talk about Deng Adel and VJ King, especially handling the ball, not really defensively, but they're not real great off the dribble, don't have a great handle, need to improve on that. And then defensively as well, guys can get around them. Quentin Snyder's not the most athletically gifted in terms of speed and quickness, especially when you talk about guys he's going against of like size. Now, if he gets a mismatch against a big guy like last year, Bam Adebayo, when he absolutely just put him on skates and dropped him and went around and scored, he can certainly do that. And at times, he still made some great moves. He did it against Grand Canyon. In transition, I think, is where Quentin Snyder really is able to shake loose and get around guys. That spin move he has that he does so well. But it's going to be interesting to see defensively what these two teams do, because Calipari loves man-to-man, almost always uses that. But given the way they were beaten by UCLA, will he stick with that against Louisville? I think he will probably start with that, because I don't know if he feels that Louisville has the same ability to beat them one-on-one and get around them that UCLA did. So I probably think he will start in man-to-man and then make an adjustment after that. But with Louisville, it will also be interesting to see, because Kentucky has not, I don't want to say they're not a good shooting team, because they actually shoot the ball as good as Louisville does. They just don't seem to have as many shooters as the Cardinals do from the three-point line. They've got 3 or 4 guys that shoot the ball from 3 total, and only, I think, 6 guys, or consistently, only 6 guys have made a three-pointer. If you look at the stats here, I went in and looked, and I tweeted this out. The three-point shooting is going to be an interesting stat in this game, because Kentucky, they shoot the ball actually slightly better, as you see there, 36% as opposed to 35% or 35.8 for Louisville. But if the interesting thing there is, look at the total number of threes that Kentucky has shot. They've shot 161 compared to 265 for the Cardinals. So the fact that Louisville shoots it about the same, it's probably a better sign for Louisville, because you're taking so many more to still shoot the same percentage, or basically the same percentage, is a good sign. Then you think, why does Louisville take so many more threes? Are a few guys taking a bunch more? Or, where is that stat based? Well, then you look here at Kentucky, only 4 players have attempted 20 or more threes on the season, and only 6 guys on the team have actually hit just any three-pointers at all, while Louisville has had 8 players that have taken 20 or more threes, and that does not include Malik Williams, who's taken 19, has attempted 19 three-pointers, and 11 U of L players have hit a 3. 8 of them have hit 6 or more on the season. So when you look at Louisville taking so many more threes, the reason is they've got a lot more guys who will take the 3. Now, I think that's a product, of course, of David Padgett giving them a looser leash offensively. More guys will take a 3. Now, you see guys you probably don't really feel comfortable taking a 3. Ray Spalding in particular. Now, I think he's only attempted 3 or 4 on the year. Lance Thomas has also taken and hit, I think he hit the only 3 he's taken. So a few of these guys on that list of guys that have shot threes aren't going to do it a lot, and hopefully you won't see them doing that in Rupp. But there are several guys, Jordan Nwora, Malik Williams, like I said, 19 attempts. Louisville just has so many more guys who will take it, while Kentucky, really only 4 guys are taking most of their three-pointers. Now, typically, when that's the case, something happens where a guy who has hardly played at all or hasn't been hitting threes for Kentucky steps in and does it. We saw it a couple years ago when Dominique Hawkins came in and hit 4, I think it was 4 three-pointers against Louisville in that game. That was a one-possession game in Rupp Arena, and the only reason he was playing the increased number of minutes was because there was a freak ankle injury, I believe, in the pregame for Kentucky. I'm going blank on the player now, but he ended up not playing, and so Hawkins steps in, hits 4 3-pointers, and that's pretty much the things that you expect to happen when these two teams meet up, especially in Rupp Arena. So will there be some kind of X factor for either team? And I tweeted out, I think if there's an X factor for Louisville, it's going to be Dwayne Sutton. I think he's probably the most gifted rebounder on the team. His size, he's not a really tall guy, decent size, 6'5", but he has a stature. He has a little bit more bulk on him that allows him to get position. He just seems to know how to rebound. I mean, sometimes guys just have that knack. Sometimes it's through effort, but sometimes it's just they know how to do it. They've grown up doing it. And Sutton is one of those guys. Jordan Nwora also, I think I've spoken on that before, also a guy who just seems to have a knack for being in the right spot to rebound the basketball. And in terms of body stature, Nwora and Sutton are pretty similar. I think Nora's a little taller, but they both have a little more bulk to them when you talk about comparing them to guys like Anas Mahmoud and Malik Williams, Ray Spalding to a lesser degree. Spalding's put on a little more bulk. But they just have a lower center of gravity, too. I think that helps. And they're just really good at getting position. And with Dwayne Sutton being a local guy who's grown up around this rivalry, I think if you're going to try and find an X factor, I think that he could provide them a spark. And we've seen him hit threes as well. I don't think that was a big part of his game that people expected him to provide. But in particular, he loves the corner. You know, we found him several times this year. He gets the ball, finds himself in that corner, and Louisville gets it to him, and he's able to knock down threes. So if I had to pick, the X factor, I would definitely go with Dwayne Sutton. Now, of course, you talk about Ray Spalding and Quentin Snyder, as I spoke on earlier. Louisville has a contingent of local guys that Kentucky just doesn't have. So you talk about a very young Kentucky team. They're always young, even more young. And I think this is the youngest team Calipari's ever had. So that combined with the fact that they just really don't have a lot of guys who have grown up around this rivalry, will that be a positive or negative? I don't know. It's hard to tell, really, going into this, how it will impact. The fact that the game is in Rupp, I think that to a lesser degree will be an issue with Kentucky because they'll have the fans there, and it's just such a more marked home court advantage for Kentucky in this game than it is for Louisville because, frankly, it's just not the same. I've said time and time again through the years, Pitino used to harp on, they bring 5,000 fans up here, and that was, of course, hyperbole and exaggeration that Pitino would do frequently, but he was correct in saying that it's not the same as what Louisville faces when they go to Rupp Arena. It just isn't. I've been to that game in Rupp Arena numerous times. There might be a few hundred Louisville fans, maybe. It is a true road environment. In Louisville, and even back going into Freedom Hall, there were a good contingent of Kentucky fans in the lower bowl near the court year in and year out for this game. So it's just not the same true road game for Kentucky here in Louisville as it is for Louisville going in to Rupp Arena. But regardless of that, Louisville has not played poorly in Rupp, even when you consider the fact that since John Calipari has arrived, the talent advantage typically has been slanted heavily towards Kentucky. This game has still been competitive. Even though Kentucky has won the majority of them, of course, we all know about 8-2 Cal over Pitino. But even when they had guys like Anthony Davis, John Wall, Karl Anthony Towns, the 38-1 team, Louisville still competed really well with Kentucky, and they've done so year in and year out. And even when Louisville was considered to be the better team, 2013, went down to the wire. Got close at the end. Louisville had a somewhat comfortable lead. Kentucky gets a rash of threes. And then Louisville was able to break away, the Shane Behan kiss dunk, and they win by 3. Last year, a couple of years ago, 2014, well, remember, I think Louisville was favored, actually, in both games. I kind of forgot about that until I looked into it. They were favored going into Rupp Arena in 2014. Still lost, but it was a very close game. And then they played in the Sweet 16. Louisville was favored again. Kentucky wins. But again, very close games, year in, year out. And then when the Kentucky played here, Karl Anthony Towns, the 38-1 team, was a very close game. So it's been competitive. It just seems that it always tips towards Kentucky on the final score. So this game, when you look at it as how evenly matched the teams appear to be, it's tough to really say, who is definitely going to win. If this was a neutral site game, it would probably be maybe a 1 or 2 point spread. I have not seen a spread yet on this game. I imagine if it hasn't come out yet, it will this afternoon, Thursday afternoon. And I would guess, I was thinking that before Kentucky lost to UCLA, it would probably be a 7.5 point spread. With that loss, it probably comes down a little bit. I'd guess between 5 and 6, and they probably get 3 or 4 points for Rupp alone. So, it's really, if this were a neutral site, a toss-up game. So it'll be interesting to see, in the end, what is going to be the difference in this game? Is it going to be perimeter shooting? Is it going to be rebounding? Kentucky and Louisville both very similar makeup. They both have a lot of length, but lack that physical presence in the inside as far as bulk and size. Guys like, Jalen Johnson, how good would it be to have him on the team this year? He played a big role last year in the win for Louisville. If they'd had him, you would almost feel very comfortable saying that Louisville should probably win the game because he would provide them that physical presence in the post to keep guys off the glass, to get in there and establish position, even if it's not for scoring, just for rebounding or whatnot. But Louisville's length with Anas Mahmoud and Ray Spalding, my concern, as always is the case when you go into this game in Rupp Arena, is the emotion of the game. Will the officials try and keep it from getting out of hand? Will they have a tight whistle at the beginning of the game? If you're Cal and you're smart, you tell your guards to go right at Ray Spalding, go right at Anas Mahmoud. I don't care if you get 5 shots blocked. The first 5 minutes of the game, I think what you're going to see is Kentucky guards taking the ball or maybe establishing a guy in the post and trying to get fouls on Mahmoud and Spalding. Because if that happens and those guys get sat on the bench in the first 4 or 5 minutes, that could be serious trouble for Louisville. So if you're David Padgett, how do you avoid that? How do you keep those guys from getting in foul trouble? Maybe you go zone. I don't know. Maybe you try to switch it up a lot to keep Kentucky off balance so they can't really figure out how to attack in that manner. But that's, I think, the number one thing. If Louisville's going to win this game, they somehow, and as tough as this is to ask going into Rupp Arena, have got to keep Mahmoud and Spalding out of foul trouble. As crazy as it might sound, maybe you start Malik Williams for 2 or 3 minutes just to get you through that initial emotional surge in this game. Yeah, you might get down 4, 6, 8 points, but just to salvage not having Spalding or Mahmoud in foul trouble early in the long run might be beneficial. Who knows? I know that sounds a little crazy, but I'm trying to think of a way to keep that from happening because that's my biggest fear is those 2 quick fouls. I tweeted out a poll, as soon as the game was set up, as soon as Louisville got the win over Grand Canyon, I tweeted out, and I've seen several others do it as well. Who gets 2 fouls first? Or how long does it take for Spalding to get 2 fouls? Mainly because Spalding was so fantastic against Grand Canyon with the career high in points and rebounds. Also a very encouraging sign. He has shown that consistency, so hopefully that continues as well. But keeping them out of foul trouble is going to be paramount, absolutely paramount to winning this game. So hopefully, and I think the first 4 or 5 minutes is where that's probably going to be the biggest issue. If they can get through that, I think that's going to help. Now, I think this game this year, you've heard it if you've listened to the talk radio this week, and it was one of the things I tweeted out as well, is not having Pitino on the sideline, especially in Rupp Arena. How's the feel for the game going to be? What's the vibe going to be like? I think adding Pitino into the rivalry really ramped up the edge, the nerve in this game. And I think once Cal arrived in Lexington, I think it took it up another notch, and I think that really affected Pitino as well. I mean, obviously, he's never going to say it, but I think it's fair to assume that when Cal arrived in Lexington, did all the things he was doing, the recruits, the Final Fours, the championship, Pitino's luster was sort of lost. And I think that affected Pitino. I think, when he saw the way, firstly, Kentucky fans responded to his return to Lexington as Louisville's coach, and the way they did not like the fact that he was Louisville's coach, and then they responded accordingly. He didn't like that. I think that got under his skin. And then when Cal arrived, Cal's placement atop, the mountain of UK basketball lore knocking Pitino down, I think that affected Pitino, and it just always seemed like he was whacked out in this game, and I think that affected the players. So will Louisville be looser in this game? It's Looser-ville. Cat fans love saying Loserville, but will it be Looserville in Rupp Arena with Pitino not being on the sidelines? So I think that is going to be a very interesting thing to look at, how they come out in this game. I think that's good when you talk about the thing I just talked about with when you consider fouls early in the game maybe being an issue. I think the tighter you play, the more nervous and tight you are in the game, you tend to maybe be out of position or do things you shouldn't do that lead to fouls. So maybe that will help. The fact that this team does have several guys that can shoot the ball, again, I think that also will help. If they're not pressing, if they don't feel tight, if they don't get that feeling from their coach, Pageant, that's been a huge benefit, I think. And as the season goes on, hopefully it'll continue to help. He gives them the green light. And at times, you see Ray Spalding shooting a three, and you're like, I'd rather not see that. But as time goes on, and I don't think Ray takes a lot of threes, the other guys who don't mind shooting a three-pointer, it's good for them to feel that they don't have to worry about it if they take an open shot, as long as it's a good look. That will help. So I think this game tomorrow will really show us that philosophy and how it's going to impact this team full of young guys who are going to need to contribute. Mora, even Sutton, even though he's been in college for a couple of years and redshirted last year, in terms of a game like this is new to him. Darius Perry, will they feel that comfort level to be able to make take shots and make them and not worry about it? So I think of all the times for this game to be in Rupp, it probably is better that it's in Rupp this year because Pageant being on the sideline, I think his approach to it will probably help the team be a little bit looser. So I'm really going to be interested to see, how the game starts out and just the feel you get from the Louisville players. Do they seem to play, I don't want to say more composed, but just looser and more relaxed? Because Pitino just always seemed to do random things in this game that really you kind of question, like playing odd guys in the rotation or even things after the game. He wouldn't do the post-game press conference in the same spot or of course, he responded to the fans the last time they played there. He flipped the bird, he denied it, but whatever. And frankly, if you're heckling Pitino like that, you deserve it. But as the coach, he's got to know not to do that. But you could just tell it always got under his skin. He didn't like the game, and that passed off onto the players without question. So it'll be interesting to see how the Cardinals go into Rupp Arena and take on the Wildcats. And will David Pageant's persona rub off on the team, much the way I think Pitino's persona rubbed off on him when they went into Rupp, in particular, in general, when they played Kentucky. Because it's unusual to think about when Pitino was the coach at Kentucky, they had tremendous success against Louisville. And not that he just utterly failed as Louisville's coach against Kentucky, but it just definitely wasn't the same. Now, of course, when Cal arrived, the talent level was a huge issue as well, but what changed with Pitino and his approach to the game? And, obviously I think the talent level changed. I think early on Pitino had a lot of local guys, and I think he had a very aggressive mindset to this game, and really most games. And I think he was consistent with that when they played Louisville. It didn't change. I think at Louisville, he just seemed to do things different. And I think it just mentally just kind of psyched him out, and he just wasn't the same Pitino that he was when he was at Kentucky when it comes to the Kentucky-Louisville matchup. And it's weird because Pitino's philosophy in the postseason was be very aggressive, don't get tight, try to make the guys relax. And I think he did the opposite of that in terms of how he approached the Kentucky game. And I think that had an effect. So we'll see how these two teams match up. Another interesting thing that I read this week was references to Jared Vanderbilt, a Kentucky freshman who has not played all week, starting to be talked about as practicing with the team. I think some pictures were put out on social media. He's practicing with the team, so is he going to play? Is he going to be this last-second, X factor that's going to play in the game against Louisville. So is that legitimate? Is this rivalry week gamesmanship by the people in the Kentucky camp to, hey, let's put this out there to give Louisville something to think about? I honestly have no clue as to the extent of his injury, the timeline he was expected to return. I have thought about a couple weeks ago, is he going to play, if and when, especially as the game with Louisville got closer. And of course, this week is when you started to see, and I think actually before the UCLA game is when this initially was put out. Of course, he did not play against them, but now that it's out there, people have talked about, will he play? Now, that's a huge, now he hasn't played yet, so I doubt a guy can just come right in and be a huge contributor, but the fact that that's the kind of guy that neither one of these teams has right now, a physical, big body, not just long, but big, who can impose their will in the post. So just to be able to plug him in there, even if for 5 or 10 minutes, would be a huge benefit for Kentucky. So we'll see. I still haven't heard anything beyond these little social media quips. So it'll be interesting to see, will he play? Will he see any action tomorrow against Louisville in Rupp Arena? We shall see. I tend to think that it's more just some gamesmanship on behalf of Kentucky's camp, because I think if he was going to play, we would have seen something from him over the last couple games, especially if he was practicing before the UCLA game. Now, that game got tight, so who knows? If they had had a lead, maybe he would have snuck in there. But we'll see. You just never know going into things like this. And during rivalry week, things like that are always helpful. I mean, if Louisville had that opportunity to throw out something like that, they probably would do the same. So we shall see. Now, when it comes to the approach to this game, I think for Louisville it's simple. If they want to win, I talked about early on, Ray Spalding, Honest Mahmoud cannot get 2 quick fouls. They just can't. So they have to play smart, avoid that. I think Kentucky's going to try and get those fouls from them. They're going to drive at them, but they just have to be smart. Don't bite for pump fakes. Mahmoud in particular is really bad on the perimeter at biting on ball fakes, especially if it's a smaller guy. Let him, if he goes to seem like he's going to take a shot, of course you don't know initially if it's a pump fake, but as long as you are, as good of a reach as Mahmoud has, if it's a shorter guard, let him start to take the shot. Know for sure they're taking the shot before you leave your feet, because if he gets you in the air and you get a cheap foul, that's going to hurt big time. So I've noticed that with Mahmoud. He's got to stop biting on pump fakes, especially 10 feet or farther from the basket, and especially if it's a guy he's got a 6 to 8 inch height advantage on. You just can't let them get you off your feet. You just have to have a hand up and be ready defensively and not leave your feet. So don't bite for the pump fakes. Also, I think a key stat for Louisville, or a key component of Louisville's offense is, and we talked about this back when Paulus had gone in and done some studying of their tape and how they really want to move without the ball and make good passes, which lead to good shots. And I think, as oversimplified as it sounds, and I mentioned this on Twitter when I sent out my promo for the show today, it's as simple as really looking to Guy Fieri for Louisville's offense. Simple. Triple D offense. Drive, draw, and dish. It really will help them. I mean, just look at the magic and the majesty of one Guy Fieri. He can really be an incredibly helpful component to leading to a Louisville victory. So we need to think triple D, not diners, drive-ins, and drives, obviously, but drive, draw, and dish. And that was awful, and I know it was awful, and I like doing stuff like that. But, like I said, it sounds simple, but get around Kentucky's defenders, which that is one of their weak points. So can Darius Perry, can Quentin Snyder in particular, find spaces, whether it be via the dribble or the pass, get into the gaps, whether, if they go zone, get into the gaps. If they don't, get around your man. And then other guys need to shift. And Louisville's shooting will be much better, as is anybody's would, if they're catching and shooting and not trying to drive and penetrate. Because I think guys like Dell and King, as I've said time and time again, not great ball handlers. Louisville's offense seems to break down when those guys start to try and do a little too much one-on-one. Dang in particular, Dang and King both, I think, are at their best when they're able to catch and shoot, and even more so when a guard has penetrated and forced the defense to adjust and then gotten the ball. So then when they catch the ball, not only can they shoot it, but they've got an advantage on the defender if he's closing out to go around him if he wants to. So a guy who's not a great ball handler and not really quick off the dribble, when you have that advantage over a defender closing out, you can then maybe get around him and get into the lane. So I think the drive, draw, dish, open shot. And I think if Louisville can focus on doing that and that alone, that will be a huge component of them winning the game, because guys like McMahon, Dang, King, Mora, even Snyder, if they're catching and able to shoot, they're going to hit far more shots than if they're trying to take a challenge shot or get around a guy off a straight, one-on-one move. They just haven't shown the ability to do that really well. So those are the kind of things that Louisville needs to do. Take good shots and do so off good passes and good motion. So time and time again, as I just said, the offense bogs down when they stop doing the simple things like that. So if they can avoid those, then I think they'll avoid the droughts and we'll give them a much better chance to win the game. So I'll come back to Cats and Cards here when I wrap things up and kind of give my final thoughts and who I think is going to win the game. It's very, very, it's almost a toss-up, really. So you can kind of lead you to believe where I might be going with my prediction. But now I want to get on to the Taxslayer Bowl as the Cardinals and Bulldogs showdown on Saturday in Jacksonville. This game is kind of getting more interesting as the closer we get to it. The Bulldogs, they had a roller coaster season. They started off, I think, preseason, were considered to be a great team in the SEC West. I even remember Kentucky fans who I know saying, well, our schedule's pretty favorable. The East is a little down, and we got the Mississippi teams out of the West. Those are who we play. So I don't think the Bulldogs were preseason considered to be a team that was going to challenge or do a whole lot. But as the season went on, they started off, got a few wins under their belt, and then they hit a rut where they played. Now, they played two good teams. Georgia and Auburn were beaten soundly by both of them. But then they were able to bounce back again and roll off a few more wins, and in doing so, got themselves ranked as high as, I believe, when the playoff rankings came out, they were up to 16, and they played Alabama and nearly beat Alabama. And I think even after that loss, they went up. So even as late as like mid-November, they were top 15 in the playoff rankings. And then the bottom sort of fell out on their season as they lost to Ole Miss in their big rivalry Egg Bowl game, lost their quarterback Fitzpatrick in that game early, which obviously was a huge component to them losing. And then after losing that game, they then lose their coach to Florida, most of their coaching staff. So they've had a roller coaster season and now move into this bowl game with a lot of question marks. I have not seen enough of them to know what they're going to bring to the table offensively with a month to prepare. That's kind of a scary component when you think about Louisville. Mississippi State kind of knows what they're going to get. But Louisville, the coaching staff, there's turnover of the coaching staff at Mississippi State. They've got a different quarterback. So how are they going to approach the game and the way they attack Louisville's defense? And then, in regards to Louisville's defense, you've got to deal with the fact that Jair Alexander and James Hearns are not going to be playing. So you've had Louisville, whose defense looked to really be turning the table late in the season, losing arguably two of their most important players defensively. Without question, they're most important, Jair Alexander. So when you look at what's on the line here for Louisville, obviously Peter Sirmon, a guy who was taking a ton of heat for much of the season. This game, there's a lot on the line because a lot of people said, well, you've got Alexander back, they're healthy again, and the defense really turned things around. Now, some people said that had to do with guys getting healthy. Others said, well, we had a bye week, we really figured things out. So which was it? I think Peter Sirmon he earned himself a lot of leeway, and he got a lot of that goodwill back from Louisville fans as they finished strongly. I wasn't quite as ready to take the heat off of him completely, because I think some of those great defensive performances, when you look at who you were playing, not the best teams in the world, and the best offense they probably played in that stretch was Syracuse, and that game was played against a Syracuse team that did not have their quarterback, Dungy, who's a very good quarterback, and it was played in a basic tropical storm in which the conditions were awful if you're a team like Syracuse who throws the ball a lot. So they had their backup quarterback, I think even third-string quarterback was playing in the weather they were playing in. So that was kind of, to me, a throwaway game. Obviously they did a great job defensively. It held them to very few points, but I wasn't quite ready to say, hey, that had everything to do with Louisville's defense, because the conditions were absolutely awful in terms of the offense for Syracuse playing shorthanded, and the style they play. And those very windy conditions just made it tough overall, and they just kind of snowballed. Now, against Kentucky, their offense has been okay, but still not one of the best offenses you're going to face, probably one of the bottom half in terms of the teams they played this year. And that sort of just got out of hand. Kentucky just could not throw the ball at all in that game. Now, you got to credit Louisville, I think. But again, Jair Alexander played in that game, played very well. Was it figuring things out? Was it certain guys being healthy? This game is going to tell us a lot about how far Louisville's defense has come, because you're going up against a team that you would think, with their star quarterback out, you should have an advantage. So I think Peter Sirmon is probably the one that has the most to lose in this game, because I think if the defense that showed up against Wake Forest and Boston College shows up again, then I don't think it's going to take long for the fans to say, all right, there's a problem. So we shall see on the defensive side of the ball what sort of performance we get out of Louisville, and what that means for Peter Sirmon moving forward. And certainly he spoke to Hearns and Alexander's decision, was very vague about it. He basically just said he was supportive of them doing what they feel they need to do, which is, I guess, the right thing to say. You got sort of a vibe that he wasn't real thrilled with it, which is a little concerning, because if you were confident in what you had ready and confident what your defense could do, you wouldn't probably get that vibe from him, but we will see. I'm willing to give him a chance in this game to see what he can do, and hopefully, that was the thing that made the difference. That bye week before Virginia allowed them to figure things out. I'm a little skeptical, but I think Saturday's going to show us, without question. We will know Saturday afternoon if it had more to do with the players being healthy, or everybody figuring things out as they were able to get through a bye week late in the season defensively. So when you talk about guys sitting out, I think a lot of people, there's been some people who were not happy that Alexander in particular is going to sit this game out. How can you, quit on your team or not be there for your team, and then why, you're sitting out, but Lamar Jackson, who probably has the most to lose, is going to play. So what kind of message does that send? I really am indifferent when it comes to a bowl game like this. If it was a New Year's Six or a playoff bowl game, I would probably feel different. But when you get to this point in the season, the bowl game really, in the grand scheme of things, you can put another trophy in your trophy case, which is great, and you want to end the season on a high note. But if they're going to sit it out, especially when you talk about Jair Alexander in particular being hurt for much of the season, I can certainly understand him sitting it out. Hearns is a little bit different, because I don't think that was a guy a lot of people really thought might sit out the bowl game. But, I think he probably just talked it over with his family, and who knows if he's talked to an agent. And he's under the impression that that's the best thing for him. So I wish him nothing but the best, in Alexander as well, as they move forward to hopefully what will be a career at the professional level. Now, in terms of Lamar Jackson, I don't feel he's not going to play. I think we would have heard something by now. But I do think that it will be nice to see Puma Pass in there for several series in this game, because let's be honest, unless Lamar Jackson is coming back, I don't think it serves anybody well for him to play a full game in a bowl game like this. Higher likelihood he does get injured. He has not shown a propensity to be a guy who gets injured, but you would hate to see something happen. And B, the next time Louisville plays a football game is going to be against the Alabama Crimson Tide. And so you would hate to think that you're sending in a guy who has had very few snaps against any competition, let alone, Power 5 SEC defense competition. So you have the opportunity to get the quarterback of the future snaps against. Now, it's not Alabama, granted, but it's still an SEC defense. So you need to hopefully take advantage of that opportunity so you're just not throwing him to the wolves, next season when the season kicks off against, perennially the best team in college football. So, again, unless Lamar Jackson plans on coming back, I'm hopeful that Pitino is going into this bowl game with the mindset that we're going to give Puma a pass, maybe even going back to when you had LaForce and Brom rotating. They had this series set up. I think it was the first series of the second quarter. Brom would come in as a freshman, set up something like that, give Pass some shots to get in there in meaningful snaps against, top-level competition and get his feet wet so he doesn't have to just go out there very green against the Crimson Tide next year. Now, if Lamar's coming back next year, that's fine, but I don't think that's going to be the case as we move forward. So in terms of what I think is going to happen, I'll first start off with the basketball game. As I said earlier, these two teams are so evenly matched. They're so similarly built in terms of being teams with a lot of length but not a lot of girth. Kentucky is not a great defensive rebounding team. Neither is Louisville. Kentucky is a very good offensive rebounding team, and when you can couple that with the fact that Louisville's not a good defensive rebounding team, that is a concern. Now, they did much better against Grand Canyon on rebounding the basketball. However, again, that's Grand Canyon. It's not Kentucky and Rupp Arena. So then you look at the shooting, which I touched on earlier. I think Kentucky has the ability to shoot the ball from three, but they just don't have a lot of guys who are great shooters. Just 3 or 4 guys take most of their perimeter shots. So I think what Louisville needs to do is be smart about if certain guys are going to shoot, who are you going to give those shots to? They can force the 2 or 3 guys who aren't the great shooters to take them. That's obviously a good thing. But what Louisville needs to do, as I noted earlier, is move, drive, draw, dish, space, pass, take good shots, and that will increase their chances, obviously. But in terms of what I think will happen with it being so evenly matched, the X factor with this obviously is Rupp Arena. I think the game is going to be very similar to the ones we see almost every time these teams have met up over the past decade. Despite talent differential, whoever might have the advantage, usually it's been Kentucky. Kentucky gets out to a little bit of a lead. Louisville kind of fights back, and then you get into the second half, and the same thing happens. Kentucky kind of gets a little bit of lead. Louisville fights back. Pretty competitive. I see a very similar script this time around. I think, unfortunately, I do think fouls might be an issue early on to 1 or 2 guys, in particular Spalding or Mahmoud. I hope it's not going to happen, but I think Kentucky probably gets out to a little bit of a lead. And then Louisville answers, and then from that point forward, it just kind of stays close. I think I've heard a lot of people say they feel like the game's going to be a high-scoring game. I don't see that. I think with as much youth as you see, not only on the court, but on Louisville's sideline, I think there's going to be a little bit of tightness early on both sides. I think things, of course, will loosen up as the game goes on, but I think the length that these two teams have, I think they're going to disrupt each other. And I think ultimately, if a team in this game scores more than 80 points, I think they win by double digits. I just don't see that happening. So I'm looking at a game, I'm going to say 74-71 Kentucky in a close game that's very similar to what we saw 2 years ago. Louisville definitely will have a chance. And I think taking good shots is going to be the key for Louisville. And defensive rebounding, of course, because it's always a component of Kentucky's offense, getting misses and scoring off misses. I think Cal says their best pass is a missed shot. That's one of his favorite things, and that's certainly still the case. Even this year, they don't have the most talented, biggest team they've had, but that's still something they do very well. So I'm going to go with a very close game, but Kentucky and Rupp Arena being the difference. And, of course, I would love to be wrong and hope that I am wrong. In terms of the bowl game, far less confident now than I was a week ago with Alexander and Hearns not playing. I do think Louisville will still win the game. I think it's going to be much closer now. I think offensively, Louisville will still have a distinct advantage over Mississippi State, but I'm not confident now that Louisville's defense will be able to provide the same thing it's been doing over the past few weeks, regardless of the fact that Mississippi State does not have their starter. I still think they're going to have something ready to attack Louisville's defense that has shown, obviously, at times to not be all that good and consistent, especially at stopping the pass, the medium and long pass in particular. So the unknowns for Mississippi State's offense are going to be the thing that makes me the most uneasy, because you just don't know what they're going to do. And now with Louisville losing these guys on the defensive side of the ball, those question marks really provide that uncertainty that I'm not really sure what to expect. So I'm going to say Louisville 35-31 in a pretty close game, not too all unlike the Texas A&M game a couple years ago that Louisville got out to a big start, but then kind of held on at the end and had to actually hold off a last-second attempt by Texas A&M that would have won the game with a touchdown. Now, the final thing I'll touch on is that Bobby Pitino in bowl games at Louisville, this is now his 8th year at Louisville. He has been to 8 bowl games, and he has never won or lost. I've tweeted this out, I think, on multiple occasions. He's never won or lost consecutive bowl games as Louisville's coach, and he didn't do it as Arkansas's coach either. I think he was there 4 years and went to 3 bowl games at Arkansas, and he won, lost, and won. So, but at Louisville, he lost his first bowl game, and since then, he has alternated wins and losses, even carrying over. His last bowl game, his first go-around was 2006, and he won the Orange Bowl. And then when he started up, they played in the Belk Bowl and lost. So he picked right up, and then, of course, they won the Music City Bowl, and then last year lost in the Citrus Bowl. So if the pattern holds, Pitino will win the bowl game. So hopefully that pattern at least holds for one more year, and then beyond that, hopefully it can just change to wins. But that's just an interesting stat. Obviously, it has nothing to do with anything, but you would think over a period of 8 bowl games that at one point in there you would lose 2 or win 2 in a row, but Pitino is yet to do that here at the University of Louisville. So that's going to do it for now. Appreciate anybody who tuned in to listen. We're going to do this each and every week here on Ville on the Ville. So hopefully the Cards will get things done on the hardwood and on the gridiron as they move forward in what is probably the biggest weekend so far in this sports season. So until next time, we'll see you here, Ville on the Ville. Go Cards.